Hello friends, my name is Akash and I'm going to start with a very interesting chapter, and the name of the chapter is Heredity and Evolution. Have you ever wondered why do you look similar to your parents? Some of you might have the eye color matching with your mother's eye color. Some of you might have the hair color matches with your dad's hair color. Some of you might have some of you might be short tempered like your dad, or some of you might be very silent and calm like your mother. So these are nothing but the characters you got from your parents. So let us study in this chapter that might be some kind of factors which are required to transfer the characters from the parents to yourself. So in this chapter, let us study what are these factors called as. So as you have all studied in your previous chapter about cell, the basic unit of life is called as a cell. A cell contains a controlling center. My dear students, we call this controlling center as what? Called as nucleus. A cell contains a controlling center called as nucleus. Nucleus controls entire system of the cell. Now, this nucleus contains, if I magnify this nucleus more under a microscope, it, it contains minute fine hair-like structures. These fine hair-like structures are nothing but called as chromosomes. These chromosomes, if I try to remove one single thread out of the nucleus, my dear students, this thread looks like double coiled structure, highly coiled structure. This highly coiled structure is nothing but called as DNA. DNA is nothing but called as a chemical compound called as deoxyribonucleic acid. If I see each segment, each part of DNA, we call this each part of DNA as genes. Okay. So cell contains a nucleus, nucleus contains chromosomes, chromosomes, each single strand is called as DNA, and each single segment of DNA we call it as gene. Now let us study what do you mean by the word gene. So genes are nothing but they codes for protein. When I say codes for proteins, my dear students, so genes are responsible for formation of certain proteins. Now these proteins they are responsible to decide the character of the body. When I say the word character, that means the physical character, whatever you see externally, and your mental character, that is whatever you think. So when I say physical character, can I say the height of yourself, either you're tall or short, is controlled by nothing but proteins, and proteins are controlled by genes. So let us study more in detail about how these characters are transferred from parents to offspring. And this process takes place through a very important life process called as reproduction. So have you ever wondered what do you mean by the word reproduction? Yes, reproduction is a very important life process. So let us study more about reproduction. Reproduction is the most important life process, my dear students, that gives rise to a new individual. So let us study what do you mean by the word reproduction. Reproduction, it is a process which gives rise to new individuals that are similar. They are not identical. They are similar to their parents with very less means subtle differences or variation. So subtle means minimum, and reproduction are of two types. So let us study, my dear students, what are these two types of reproduction. The first type is called as sexual reproduction, and the second type is called as asexual reproduction. So reproduction are how many types? Two types, sexual and asexual. When I say sexual reproduction, so always remember there are how many parents involved? Two parents are involved. One is male and second one is female. So let us see their offsprings. So students, observe the baby, observe the offspring. So can I say the offspring is somewhat similar to its parents? Yes. Why? Because the DNA is transferred from parents to the offspring during a process called as sexual reproduction. Now, in asexual reproduction takes place in a unicellular as well as a multicellular organism. But in asexual reproduction, only one parent is involved. Now, let us take an example of a potato. Potato will definitely do asexual reproduction. Now, if you observe very detailed minutely, you can see the offsprings look somewhat similar to the parent. That means this offspring will grow and form a baby potato. Now this baby potato will be looking similar to its parents. So what have you observed, my dear students, in this slide. That is, in sexual reproduction, the visible differences can be seen. Differences are also called as variations can be seen. The baby is not identical. The baby is what? Similar to its parents. But here, in asexual reproduction, no visible differences can be seen. So, whereas in sexual reproduction, the differences or the variations are maximized during sexual reproduction. Whereas in asexual reproduction, very little variations are during asexual reproduction. For example of asexual reproduction is amoeba. Amoeba is one single cell gets split up into two daughter cells. You cannot make out the difference between who is the parent and who is the offspring. Whereas, for example, if you take a human example, you can make out easily that who is the parent and who are the offspring. So that is the major difference between sexual and asexual reproduction. So let us study more in detail that about what do you mean by the word variation and heredity. Have you ever thought what will be the mechanism by which the variations are created and passed from one generation to the next generation? Let's understand with a very simple example. So let's take an example of a mother and the father with their son. If you see very minutely, dear students, the skin color of the son and the mother matches. So can I say the child gets the skin color from its mother? Okay. Now if you see the height of the child, that is the height of the son matches with the height of its father. So can I say the child gets its height from its father? So here variations are created and passed on from parents to the offspring. Okay. So inheritance from the previous generation provides the basic body design. So the basic body designs will always remain the same. So for a human being will produce only a human offspring, and cat will be producing only a cat offspring, and a dog will be producing a only dog offspring. That is very important, my dear students. Reproduction takes place only with the similar same species with the and gives a basic body design. So transfer of character from one generation to another generation is called as heredity. So what do you mean by the word heredity? Is nothing but the parents over here are transferring their character, is also called as traits from themselves to these kids. Okay. So dear students, let us study more in detail about this family. Now the son is grown up into a full grown adult. So when this new generation will reproduce, he got married to a very beautiful lady over here. He has a beautiful family. He has two beautiful kids. Now the second generation, that means its kids, will have differences that they inherit from the first generation, as well as they will be having their own uniqueness. That means a newly created differences. So now let us study more in detail about asexual reproduction and the inheritance. Now, have you ever wondered, my dear students, how this single cell organism like amoeba will reproduce? Yes, so for that we can take a very beautiful example of a single cell organism called as bacteria. Now, this parent bacteria will reproduce asexually. Now, this single cell parent bacteria will divide itself into two daughter bacteria. Can you make out any differences from the offspring and from the parents? No, because there are very less changes, less differences. Now these two daughter bacteria will again redivide into four daughter bacteria. Now if you consider all the three generations, can I say they all look similar? Yes, but why do they look similar? Let us study that in more detail. There would be only very minor differences between them because of the very less inaccuracies in the DNA copying that is transferred from the parents to the offsprings. So basically, inheritance determines the process by which traits or the characters are reliably inherited from parents to offspring. So what are inherited traits or characters and how these characters are inherited by the offspring? Let us study this particular topic with a beautiful illustrations. So let us suppose a male with a attached earlobe. This part is called as the earlobe. Okay, the male is with an attached earlobe and the female is with a free earlobe. If they both get married, then have you ever wondered what will be the child earlobe look like? The child earlobe can be either attached or can be either free. So after observation, we have observed that the child has an attached earlobe. That means we can say that the child here has inherited the traits of attached earlobe from his father. Very good. So he had attached earlobe from his father. But have you wondered where did the free earlobe character of the mother has disappeared? But why the free earlobe straight from the mother has been not inherited? Now, in this particular topic, we are going to study the life of Mendel. So, as you have observed, my dear students, that mother and father, they contribute equal quantity of gene from parents to offspring. That means the mother and the father, they both contribute equal quantity of gene to their offspring. Offspring means their son. For example, that's the son. The son contains the equal quantity of gene from their parents. That means from the father and from the mother. If the contribution is equal, then why different traits of the child? Why the child look different than their parent? Why the child doesn't look identical to their parents? If the contribution is equal, then why different traits? And if the different traits, then what percentage of traits goes to the offspring from their parents? All these questions were answered by one of a great personality. He was born on 20th of July 1822. He went to a monastery for his education, and then later he went to study science and mathematics to the University of Vienna. Later he appeared in the examination for teaching certificate, but eventually he failed. But his failure did not suppress his zeal for scientific knowledge, scientific quest. Then he started working on lot of researches. He went back to his monastery and he started growing a garden of pea plant. Pea plant is nothing but Pisum sativum called in science. Pea plant is also called as garden pea. So he started growing pea plants and his name was Gregor Johann Mendel. He is one of the great personality and he is responsible for crossing different pea plants and observing what will be the offspring. So Mendel blended his knowledge of science and mathematics and was the first one to keep a count of individual, that means offspring, exhibiting a particular trait in each generation. So basically, Mendel self-pollinated different pea plant and he observed that what will be the offspring that will look like. Will it look like exactly like their parents or will it be similar to their parents? This helped him to arrive at the law of inheritance. So now we are going to study about Mendel's experiment in this particular topic. So as you have already known, my dear student, that Mendel has grown pea plant in his garden. And let us study what experiment Mendel has performed on this pea plant. So Mendel has used visible 7 contrasting characters of Pisum sativum, that means garden pea plant. So let us study those pea plant 7 contrasting character in further detail. The first character Mendel has observed is the height of the plant. Some plants are tall and some plants are short. Short is called as dwarf. That was the first character observed by Gregor Johann Mendel. The second character, what he has observed was the color of the flower. Some are purple in color and some are white in color. That was his second observation. The third observation done by Mendel was the shape of the seed. Some are round in shape and some are wrinkled in shape. That was his third observation. The fourth observation done by Gregor Johann Mendel was the color of the seed. Some are yellow in color and some are green in color. That was his fourth observation. His fifth observation was color of the pod. Pod is the covering of the seed. Some pod are green in color, some are yellow in color. The next observation was shape of the pod. As you can see in the first image that the pod is full with seeds. That means the first pod is full and second pod is with very less or flat seeds. We call it that pod as constricted. So some pods are full and some pods are constricted. The next observation he saw was the position of the flower. Some flower, as you can see on image number 1, that they have grown between the axis of two branches. We call this flower as axial and some grow on the tip of the flower. On the tip of the plant, we call it as terminal. So the position of the flower, some are axial and some are terminal. So great scientist called as Gregor Johann Mendel has performed several experiments with Physum sativum. What was he thinking to do with this trait? Let us study that in more detail. He wanted to produce offspring by crossing or pollinating two different characters, and he wanted to check what percentage of offspring with particular trait will be produced. And Mendel made several crosses of pea plant, that means Physum sativum, involving only one pair of characters out of the 7 visible contrasting characters are called as traits. Let us study in further details with an example. So Mendel took the first character, that is the height of the plant. Some are tall and some are dwarf. He pollinated both the plant and wanted to check what will be their offspring look like. Either they can be tall or they can be dwarf. He only took one pair at a time, so we call this experiment as monohybrid cross. So now let us study the result of the first monohybrid cross. Mono means one single character at a time. Hybrid means a combination of two parents, and crossing means pollination. So let us see what result Mendel got after its first monohybrid cross. Mendel experiment state that Mendel observed all plants were tall in the first generation. Let us study Mendel's experiment in further detail. Mendel took one plant to be tall and second plant to be dwarf. He self-pollinated the tall plant with the dwarf plant. We call this as crossing. So let us study what Mendel observed after this crossing. Mendel observed all plants were tall in the first generation. There were no dwarf plants. He was wondering where the dwarfness trait disappeared, because all plants you can see, observe here, were tall in nature. Mendel thought of self-crossing, self-pollinating the plant of the first generation. Self-pollinating is called as crossing. So let us study what Mendel has observed after this crossing. So Mendel observed that there were 3 tall plants and 1 dwarf plant in the second generation. When Mendel thought in the first generation there were 2 tall plants, then where the dwarfness trait has arrived. Now dear students, we are going to study about Gregor Johann Mendel's terminologies. So let us study what are the terminologies in further detail. Mendel showed his experiment and result using certain terminologies, specific terminologies. Now remember one thing, the character which masks or hides its partner is called as dominant, and the character or the character which gets masked is called as recessive. For example, he took a tall plant and he took a dwarf plant. He self-crossed both the plants. Now over here, the tall plant hides the character of dwarfness. So can I say tall is dominant and dwarf is recessive? So for example, he took tall plant and crossed with the dwarf plant. Now let's study that in further detail. If we took a tall plant, crossed with a dwarf plant, what will be the possibilities of formation of an offspring? He observed all plants were tall in nature in the next generation of the plants. That means he observed that tall is dominant and dwarf is recessive. Now Mendel symbolizes tall in with capital letter. The Mendel showed dominant trait with capital letter and recessive trait with recessive gene with small letter. For example, dominant and recessive. The height of the plant, some are tall and some are dwarf. So he denoted tall as dominant with capital T and capital T. You have to use the first letter of the tallness and you have to express the same for the dwarfness but with smaller letter, that means small t and small t. Now in Mendel's monohybrid cross, mono means only one character at a time. He took capital T with capital T, that means a pure tall plant. He crossed with a dwarf plant, that is a pure dwarf plant, that is small t and small t. He named this generation as P1 generation, that means the first parental generation. The second step is called as segregation of gametes. Now what do you mean by the word segregation? That means separation of this both the gametes. Now let us study the third step, that is what will be the generation. What will the generation of the offspring that will look like? The first combination is capital T with small t. Second combination is capital T with small t. Third combination is capital T with small t. And the fourth combination is capital T and small t. And he named this generation as what? F1 generation. That means the first filial generation. Filial means offsprings. He observed that in F1 generation, all plants were tall in nature. If you observe very detailed, very minutely, my dear students, the plant of F1 generation, it contains a gene of both the parents. That means capital T and small t. But all the plants were tall. Why? Because the tall gene has masked the dwarf gene. So can I say tall is dominant and dwarf is recessive? Yes or no, my dear students? Now we are going to study further what he did with his experiment. Now he thought of self-crossing the F1 generation. That means now he thought of self-crossing the offspring. Now he took hybrid tall, that means the F1 generation, and named this generation as P2 generation, that is the second parental generation. He took capital T with small t, capital T with small t. The second step is called as segregation of gametes. Capital T and small t are separated. Capital T and small t are separated. The third step is formation of F2 generation. Now let us study what will be the possibilities of babies, that means offspring in the F2 generation. The first combination is capital T with capital T. Can I say this plant is nothing but a pure tall? Yes. The next step is capital T with small t. Can I say this is also a tall, but not a pure tall, but a hybrid tall, because it contains the gene of dwarfness which got masked. The third combination is capital T and small t. This is also a hybrid tall. And the last combination is small t and small t. Can I say this is nothing but a pure dwarf? See, you observed in the second filial generation, 3 plants were tall and 1 plant is dwarf. Hence, he noted that tall gene is dominant and dwarf gene is recessive. Now, similarly, Mendel conducted experiment with all the other 6 characters and he found out the following result. So let us study the first character, that is the shape of the seed. So if you remember, my dear students, the 7 visible contrasting character, the seed were round and some were wrinkled. So he crossed the round seed with the wrinkled seed and he observed all seed in the F1 generation were round. So he observed that round is dominant and the wrinkled is recessive. Now the second combination is the color of the seed. He observed that some seed were yellow and some seed were green. So he crossed the yellow seed with the green seed and he observed all the seeds in the F1 generation were yellow in color. So he observed that he stated that yellow is dominant and green is recessive. Next combination is the shape of the pod. Pod is nothing but the covering of the seed. Some pods are full. He crossed with constricted pods. That means they are flat in nature. He observed that in the F1 generation, all the pods were full in nature. That means he stated that full is dominant and constricted is what? Recessive. He took another character, that is the color of the pod. He took the green pod crossed with the yellow pod and he observed that all the pods in the F1 generation were green in color. So hence he stated that, concluded that green color pod is dominant and yellow color is what? Recessive. The next combination, he took the color of the flower. Some are red and some are white. So he crossed the red flower with the white flower. Now he observed in the F1 generation that all flowers were red in color. So can I say red is dominant and white is recessive. Then he took the position of the flower. Some are axial, some are terminal. So he crossed the axial flower with the terminal flower and he observed that in the F1 generation all flowers were axial. That means axial is dominant and terminal is recessive. So now we are going to study the Mendel symbol. So let us study that in further detail. What is responsible for this trait or character? Mendel stated that there are some factors which are present inside the cell which are always present in pairs. Now this factor in today's generation, we call it as gene. So Mendel used two terms to explain his observation. The first term is called as phenotype. Now what do you mean by the word phenotype? How an organism will look externally is called as phenotype. The appearance of any detectable characteristics of an individual is called as phenotype. For example, phenotype of my skin is reddish. Phenotype of my hair is black color. Phenotype of my eye is black color. So can I see any external characteristic is called as phenotype. The second word which Mendel has introduced is called as genotype. When I say the word genotype, is nothing but genetical composition of an individual. If the color of the hair is black, that is his phenotype, then the genetical composition will be capital B with capital B. That is this genotype. We'll take a second example of the red flower. If you see this flower, my dear students, observe this flower. This flower color is red. So can I say externally it looks red in color? So can I say the phenotype? That means the external appearance is red. And what will be the internal genetical composition of the flower is known as genotype, that is capital R and capital R. Now we are going to study about Mendel's monohybrid cross in further detail. When I say monohybrid cross, my dear students, mono means one. Hybrid is nothing but the offsprings, and they are produced because of pollination called as crossing. So it is called as Mendel's monohybrid cross. So now Mendel crossed the tall pea plant with the dwarf pea plant over here. Now let us study the tall pea plant. Let us assume that tall is nothing but dominant and dwarf is recessive. So tall is denoted by capital T and capital T over here, and dwarf is denoted by small t and small t. Now Mendel crossed both the plants, that is capital T crossed with small t and named the generation as what? P1 generation, called as the first parental generation. The second step is called as segregation of gametes, that means formation of gametes. During the formation of gametes, the genes get separated, segregated. Capital T getting separated, small t are getting separated. As we have already learned about it, let us study the formation of offspring, that is capital T with small t, capital T with small t, capital T with small t, capital T with small t. Mendel named this generation as what? F1 generation, called as first filial generation. Filial means the generation of the offspring. He observed that all plants in F1 generation are tall. So he stated that tall is dominant and dwarf is recessive, that is small t is recessive. Then Mendel self-crossed the two plants of F1 generation. That means now he self-crossed the offspring of F1 generation. Now students, you remember what was the gene inside the offspring? That is capital T with small t, capital T with small t. He took two plants of F1 generation and named it as P2 generation, called as the second parental generation. The next step is called as formation of gametes, or can I say segregation of genes, that is capital T, small t, capital T and small t. Let us study what will be the formation of F2 generation, that means the second filial generation. The first combination, if you see, if I put capital T small t in a box and capital T small t in this box, we call this square as what? Punnett square. The first combination is capital T with capital T. Second combination is capital T with small t. Third combination is capital T with small t. And the fourth combination is small t, small t. If I say capital T is what? Pure tall. Capital T and small t is nothing but hybrid tall, and small t is nothing but pure dwarf. Yes. So can I say Mendel observed there are three tall plants, that is with capital T is dominant over small t, and there is only one dwarf plant because it contains both the genes as small t and small t, both are recessive. You observe three plants were tall in nature and one plant was dwarf in nature. So Mendel concluded his experiment of monohybrid cross as he observed in the F2 generation three plants were tall. So this one is what? Capital T, capital T, capital T, small t, capital T, small t and small and small t. We are going to find out the ratio called as the phenotypic ratio. When I say phenotype, that means any organism that looks externally is called as phenotype. Now, if you observe in the F2 generation, there were 3 plants which were tall in nature and 1 plant was dwarf in nature. So can I say it looks externally tall? There are how many plants which looks externally tall? That means there are 3 plants which looks externally tall and 1 plant was short. So can I say the ratio of nothing but is 3:1? That is the phenotypic ratio is 3:1. Now we are going to find out the next ratio called as genotypic ratio. When I say genotype, so that means internal genetic composition. How the genes of the plant will look like. If you observe in the F2 generation, one plant was with capital T, capital T. The combination is only 1. Capital T and small t, there are how many combinations? 2 combinations. And small t, that is 1 combination. Hence, the ratio, that is genotypic ratio, is 1:2:1. So now let's study about Mendel's dihybrid cross terminology. So Mendel performed his second experiment called as Mendel's dihybrid cross. So in his first experiment called as monohybrid cross, Mendel took only one single character of garden pea plant. Now Mendel thought instead of taking one single character, let's take 2 characters at a time. So let us study what character Mendel has selected for his experiment called as Mendel's dihybrid cross. Mendel crossed tall pea plant with axial flower. That will be the tall pea plant with axial flower. That will be the first garden pea plant. And he took second plant, that is Mendel took dwarf pea plant with terminal flower. So first one he took tall with axial and dwarf with terminal for his experiment called as Mendel's dihybrid cross. Mendel later thought that tall and axial plant are dominant, whereas dwarf and terminal plant are recessive. So he symbolizes tall pea plant with axial flower as capital T, capital T, capital A, capital A, and dwarf pea plant with terminal flower as small t, small t, small a, small a. So he named this generation as P1 generation, called as first parental generation. He made a cross between the tall with axial flower and dwarf with terminal flower. He did self-pollination. What will be the second step, my dear students? Yes, correct. The second step is called as segregation of gametes. So the gametes are getting separated. So capital T, capital A are getting separated over here, and small t, small a, small a are getting separated over here. So let us study what will be the possibilities of formation of the offspring. So he observed that in the F1 generation, that means the first filial generation of his Mendel's dihybrid cross, he observed that first combination was capital T with small t, capital A with small a. So can I say this plant is tall and the position of the flowers are axial because it contains capital T and capital A. The second combination is again capital T with small t, capital A with small a. So can I say, dear students, this combination is also tall and axial. The third combination is capital T with small t, capital A with small a. Can I say this combination is also tall with axial? And the last combination, what are the last possibilities? That is capital T with small t, capital A with small a. So can I say this combination is nothing but tall with axial flower? Mendel has observed that the F1 generation, called as the first filial generation, all plants are tall and bearing axial flower. Hence, he stated that tall and axial are dominant over dwarf and terminal. So let us study what Mendel did further with this F1 generation. So he observed that Mendel, on self-pollinating the F1 generation, that means the first filial generation, what will be the possibilities of offspring formation in F2 generation? So he did a cross between the plants of F1 generation, that is tall and axial with tall and axial. So second step is called as formation of gamete. So now let us study how the gametes are formed over here. Okay. So capital T, capital A, capital T with small t with capital A and small t with small t. Similarly, capital T with capital A, capital T with small t with capital A, small t with small a. Now, Mendel has put all these gamete in a square called as Punnett square. You can see a sign over here, that is a male and a female. So Mendel observes his first combination as capital T, capital T, capital A, capital A. His second combination was capital T, capital T, capital A with small a. Third one was capital T with small t, capital A with capital A. Next one was capital T with small t, capital A with small a. The next combination was capital T with capital T, capital A with small a. And the next combination was capital T with capital T, small a and small a. The next combination is capital T with small t, capital A with small a. The next combination will be capital T with small t, small a, small a. The next combination will be capital T with small t, capital A and capital A. The next combination is capital T, small t, capital A, small a. The next will be small t, capital A, capital A. Next will be small t, capital A and small a. Next will be capital T with small t, capital A and small a. Next will be capital T with small t, small a and small a. Next will be small t, capital A with small a. Next will be small t, small a and small a. So you observe these are the possibilities of formation of offspring in his second filial generation. So let us study what Mendel did the next step, that is formation of gametes are done. F2 is already been produced. So now what is the next step, my dear students? Yes, that is ratio, that is genotypic and phenotypic ratio. So now Mendel thought of removing the ratios of these offsprings of F2 generation. So this is the Punnett square and this one will be the F2 generation, that is the second filial generation of Mendel's dihybrid cross. Now if you observe, what do you mean by the word phenotype? I hope you will remember, dear kids. Any external characteristics are called as phenotype. So how will the tree look externally? It can be either tall or axial or either dwarf or terminal. Let us study. The first combination will be tall and axial. So if you observe the table, my dear students, can you see those highlighted boxes? Why these boxes are highlighted? Because it contains capital T and capital A. So wherever you see capital T and capital A, so can I say that plant will be tall and axial? If you count the number of boxes, so there will be 9 boxes. So tall and axial phenotype is 9. Next combination will be tall with terminal. If you see a capital T and small a combination, that means that plant will be tall and terminal. If you have seen this Punnett square, you can see there are 3 types of tall and terminal plants. Okay. So what will be the phenotype of tall and terminal? That is 3. If you have observed dwarf and axial, that means that plant should contain small t and capital A. So there are how many boxes here? There are 3 boxes here. The next last combination will be dwarf and terminal. So that means small t and small t should be there in the particular plant. So that means that plant is dwarf and terminal. Hence the ratio is 9:3:3:1. The phenotypic ratio of dihybrid cross will be 9:3:3:1. 9 will be tall and axial, tall and terminal will be 3, dwarf and axial will be 3 and dwarf and terminal will be 1. Now we are going to find out the genotypic ratio. When I say the word genotype, Any internal genetic composition is called as genotype. So let's see. The first combination is capital T, capital T, capital A is 1. The second combination is capital T, capital T, capital A, small a is 2. The third combination will be capital T with small t, capital A and capital A. If you observe the table, my dear students, there are only 2 combinations. Next will be capital T with small t, capital A with small a. If you observe the Punnett square, there are how many combinations? 4 combinations. And next will be capital T with small t, small a and small a. If you have seen the table, there are how many combinations? 2 combinations. Next will be small t, capital A and small a. If you observe that highlighted boxes, there are 2 combinations. Next will be small t, small a, small a. That is only 1 combination. Next will be small t, capital A, capital A. That is only 1 combination. And the last but not the least is capital T, small a, small a. That is only 1 combination. So what will be the genotypic ratio, my dear students? The genotypic ratio is 1 is to 2 is to 2 is to 4 is to 2 is to 2 is to 1 is to 1 is to 1. Dear students, let's start with the next topic, that is the mechanism of heredity. Have you ever wondered how does this mechanism of heredity works? So let's take a very beautiful example of a plant. If I magnify the plant cell, can I say you can see the nucleus at the center? And if I magnify the nucleus, you can see fine thread-like structures called as chromosomes. If I entwine this chromosome, if I remove one single thread of chromosome, it will look something like this called as DNA. What is DNA, my dear students? DNA is nothing but a chemical compound. DNA is called as deoxyribonucleic acid. And each part of DNA, each segment of DNA, we call this segment as gene. And genes are responsible for coding of protein, that means formation of certain proteins, or we can say enzymes. So let us study how these proteins are responsible to give the character to a living organism. Characters are also known as traits. Now let us study with a very beautiful example again. Let's understand the mechanism of heredity with a beautiful example of a plant. So let us magnify the plant cell. Plant cell contains nucleus. Nucleus contains chromosome. Chromosome is made up of DNA, and each part of DNA is called as gene. Now, this genes codes for certain enzyme or certain proteins which are responsible for tallness or shortness of the plant. Now, these proteins or enzymes are responsible for giving the character, that is the height of the plant. Genes code for an enzyme which are responsible for tallness of the plant. Now this enzyme produces a plant hormone which triggers the plant growth and resulting in the tallness of the plant. For example, if there is any kind of alteration in the gene, that means it makes the enzyme less efficient and has to produce less hormone, hence the plant remains short. Let's study the mechanism of inheritance. Have you ever wondered, my dear students, how do offspring inherit single set of genes from mother and from father when the genes are always present in pair in a single set of DNA? So let's understand the method of inheritance with a beautiful example of Gregor Johann Mendel's dihybrid cross. If a dihybrid cross is made between round seed with yellow color, wrinkled seed with green color, what will be the possibilities of offspring? So can I name this generation as P1 generation because they are called as first parental generation. Over here, the first plant is with round seed with yellow color. Second plant is with wrinkled seed with green color. So Mendel named this generation as first parental generation. Can I say round and yellow are dominant and wrinkled and green are recessive? So always remember, dominant should be always expressed in capital letter. So round and yellow are expressed at capital R, capital R, capital Y, capital Y. Over here, let's suppose the gene of dominant round shape, that is capital R is shown with dark red color. And let's suppose the gene of dominant yellow color trait, that is capital Y is shown with dark blue color. Over here in wrinkled and green, those are recessive traits. So small r, small y. Let's suppose the gene of recessive wrinkled trait is expressed as small r is shown with light red color. Whereas over here, let's suppose the gene of recessive green color trait, that is small y is shown with light blue color. So let's see the formation of gametes from the first parental generation. So can I see over here small capital R, capital Y, capital R and capital Y are segregated. Small r, small y are segregated. So here can I say this step is called as segregation of gametes. So what type of progeny, that means what type of offsprings will be produced in the X1 generation? The F1 generation shows the presence of both dominant and recessive gene from their parents. So let us study the F1 generation. Capital R with small r, capital Y with small y. Capital R with small r, capital Y with small y. Capital R with small r, capital Y with small y. And the last one is capital R with small r, capital Y with small y. Now Mendel named this generation as what? F1 generation. That means first filial generation. The F1 progeny shows the presence of both dominant and recessive gene from the parent, but the phenotype of all the F1 generation is round and yellow because the first seed contains capital R and capital Y. This seed will be round and yellow. Second seed also contains capital R, capital Y. Third seed will contain capital R, capital Y, and the fourth seed also contains capital R and capital Y. This means all the seeds of F1 generation are what? Round and yellow. Now, if you observe the F1 generation, that is capital R with small r, capital Y with small y over here. Okay, can I say the gametes which are segregated, they contain the hybrid gametes also. If you observe here, capital R, capital Y, small y are the parental gametes. Whereas capital R with small r with capital Y, these both are nothing but hybrid gametes. So can I say if progeny plant inherited a single gene from each parent, then the two characteristics, that is the shape of the seed and the color of the seed, would be linked to each other and the hybrid gametes cannot be formed. But this is not the case in this experiment, dear students, because you can see the hybrids as well, but as a separated individual pieces, each called as chromosome.